Mr. Brooks, your blood pressure is alarmingly elevated, and you're exhibiting concerning neurological signs. You require immediate transport to the hospital, stated the custodian, with a conviction that silenced the billionaire CEO's tirade on the phone. Richard Brooks, 53 years old, the proprietor of a pharmaceutical conglomerate valued at $2 billion, regarded the 42-year-old African-American woman as if she had uttered gibberish. Kesha Washington stood in her work attire, clutching her cleaning supplies, possessing the audacity to offer him medical counsel. "Excuse me?" Richard scoffed derisively, lowering his mobile device. "Are you dispensing medical advice now? What exactly is your qualification again?" "Advanced Custodial Services." The acrimony permeated the opulent office on the 30th floor of the Brooks Pharmaceutical Tower. Kesha had just observed Richard stumbling, his hands trembling, and his thoughts disoriented during a video conference. These were symptoms she recognized instantly, yet which all the executives present completely overlooked. "Sir, I am merely trying to," Kesha began, but was cut short. "You are nothing but a cleaner," Richard snarled, his visage flushed with indignation. "Return to your chemicals and allow me to manage my enterprise in peace. And next time, maintain silence while you clean." Unbeknownst to Richard, Kesha Washington had served as a registered nurse for 15 years, prior to her ruin stemming from a fabricated scandal. The racial discrimination was so severe that it compelled her to accept cleaning positions for her livelihood. Nevertheless, her medical acumen remained active. She had noticed the indicators for weeks: the sluggish coordination, the occasional slurred speech, the episodes of confusion that Richard attributed to professional pressures. All the symptoms suggest a serious neurological ailment that, if left untreated, could prove fatal. "I comprehend perfectly, Mr. Brooks," Kesha responded with an unnerving composure. "I shall continue my duties." However, as Richard resumed his high-stakes calls, Kesha undertook an action he would never anticipate. She began meticulously documenting every detail, each symptom, each incident. Every moment, his pride overshadowed his instinct for self-preservation. Richard Brooks believed he held absolute dominion over his company and its employees. He failed to realize that the woman who maintained his office harbored a secret that could preserve his existence, provided he shed his arrogance enough to heed it. As Kesha discreetly organized her cleaning equipment, her trained eyes continued their observations. She understood precisely what was afflicting Richard Brooks. More importantly, she knew the exact course of action. If you have ever been subjected to underestimation due to your ethnicity or social standing, then you understand that sometimes the most potent retribution is simply being correct when everyone else errs. Subscribe to the channel to discover how an unassuming custodian ascended to become the sole individual capable of saving the life of the man who scorned her. 3 days later, Richard Brooks had deteriorated, yet his arrogance had amplified threefold. During an executive board meeting, Kesha witnessed him misidentifying his own directors and repeating the same query multiple times within a 10-minute span. As she discreetly approached to clear the conference table, she overheard fragments of their conversation that instilled her with alarm. "Richard, are you well? You appear rather bewildered today," James Morrison, the chief financial officer, murmured with genuine concern. "Bewildered?" Richard erupted, forcefully striking the table with his fist. "I am perfectly fine. Perhaps you are failing to grasp my thought process. I have always been 3 steps ahead of everyone." Kesha observed the subtle tremor in his left hand, the manner in which he blinked repeatedly as if attempting to sharpen his vision. Progressive neurological manifestations she had encountered numerous times during her tenure in the neurology department at Metropolitan Hospital before her professional downfall. The scandal had commenced 5 years prior when Kesha, then the head nurse on the night shift, publicly challenged Dr. Mitchell Barnes's excessive opioid prescriptions. She had documented that patients of color consistently received lesser dosages of analgesics compared to Caucasian patients with identical ailments, while simultaneously being more readily categorized as drug seekers. "Are you leveling accusations of racism against a respected physician?" inquired the hospital director, Dr. Patricia Wells, during the disciplinary hearing. "Based on what scientific evidence?" "Based on 15 years of experience and 200 pages of detailed documentation," Kesha replied, presenting her meticulous research. However, the internal inquiry was a charade. Dr. Barnes was a personal acquaintance of the chief executive officer and a substantial benefactor to the hospital. Instead of reviewing her evidence, they fabricated an alternative narrative. Keisha was emotionally unstable and projecting her personal racial grievances onto medical practice. The final blow materialized when they alleged she had contravened medication protocols, baseless accusations they could never substantiate, yet sufficient to shatter her career. Within 6 months, she forfeited her license, her reputation, and any prospect of re-entering the medical profession. Individuals like you invariably believe the world is indebted to you, Dr. Barnes remarked on her final day, accompanied by a smile that betrayed no warmth. Perhaps it is time to acknowledge that certain environments are simply not meant for you. Now, 5 years later, while tidying the office of the most influential figure in the pharmaceutical sector, Keisha experienced a bitter irony. Richard Brooks owned the corporation that manufactured the very opiates Dr. Barnes had selectively dispensed. "Are you still present?" Richard's sharp voice jolted her back to the immediate reality. The meeting had concluded, and he was scrutinizing her with evident irritation. "How long does it take to clean a desk?" "My apologies, Mr. Brooks. I was merely being meticulous." "Meticulous?" He emitted a dismissive chuckle. "You are a janitor, not a surgeon. In your profession, speed is paramount over perfection." Keisha nodded silently, yet her trained eyes continued to register the minute details. Richard's right pupil exhibited a slightly greater dilation than his left. His verbal responses demonstrated a subtle latency. His fine motor control was demonstrably compromised. Classic indicators of elevated intracranial pressure. "And another matter," Richard continued, adjusting his necktie with less practiced movements than usual. "Next time you entertain the brilliant notion of imparting medical counsel to me, recall that I retain the services of some of the nation's foremost physicians. I have no need for the perspective of someone whose occupation involves cleaning restrooms for a living." The casual cruelty of his words struck a deep chord, yet Keisha maintained a neutral expression. She had mastered the art of absorbing humiliation without displaying outward reactions, a skill honed through years of systemic prejudice. "I understand perfectly, sir," she replied, commencing the act of stowing her cleaning implements. But as she departed the office, Keisha arrived at a crucial decision. That evening, in the confines of her modest apartment, she accessed her laptop and began to type, not a formal medical report. She no longer possessed the requisite credentials for such a document. Instead, she initiated a different endeavor, a comprehensive, anonymous missive addressed to Richard's wife, Margaret Brooks. Keisha had conducted extensive research into the Brooks family. Margaret was a qualified nurse, although she had not practiced in many years. She would undoubtedly grasp the medical terminology and recognize the gravity of the symptoms being described. Each word was meticulously chosen. Each symptom was documented with temporal accuracy. Each observation was substantiated by concrete behavioral evidence. She completed the letter at 3 o'clock in the morning, reviewed it 5 times, and placed it within an unmarked envelope. Richard Brooks believed he had effectively silenced another subordinate individual. What he remained unaware of was that he had just inadvertently roused something far more formidable than resentment. A trained nurse with a resolute mission to preserve lives, even when those lives belonged to individuals who treated her with disdain. As Keisha sealed the envelope, a chilling certainty settled within her. She would not permit Richard's arrogance to claim his life, not because he merited survival, but because she had taken a solemn oath to safeguard lives. And certain vows transcend the treatment we receive from those whose lives we preserve. What that billionaire CEO failed to perceive was that each insult merely fortified the resolve of a woman who had already endured the loss of everything once, and discovered she still possessed a substantial contribution to offer the world, should anyone possess sufficient humility to listen. The correspondence reached Margaret Brooks on a quiet Tuesday, delivered discreetly by an anonymous courier. Margaret, a nursing graduate from Johns Hopkins University, immediately recognized the clinical precision of the language and the gravity of the observations detailed within. Progressive neurological symptoms, impaired motor coordination, episodes of temporal confusion, she murmured, perusing the document for the 3rd time. Each phrase echoed the concerns she herself had attempted to convey to her husband in recent weeks. only to be met with the same dismissive disdain he reserved for those he deemed inferior. Margaret recognized Richard's altered state. The frequent irrational outbursts had intensified. He overlooked crucial appointments, reiterated the same narratives at social gatherings, and his once immaculate penmanship now betrayed a tremor characteristic of a far elder individual. Who could have authored this? She mused, scrutinizing every meticulously documented medical detail. Someone with formal training, undoubtedly. Someone who observed Richard closely and regularly. Meanwhile, on the 30th floor of Brooks Pharmaceutical, Keisha executed her strategy with the precision of an experienced nurse. Throughout her cleaning rounds, she had commenced discreetly documenting every observable detail: the timing of episodes, the intensity of tremors, the patterns of cognitive disorientation. She found an unexpected confederate and doctor, Patricia Williams, a retired neurologist who provided part-time consultation on medical insurance matters from the adjacent building. Keisha had encountered her in the parking structure when Patricia remarked on discerning nursing techniques in the manner Keisha assisted an elderly woman who had stumbled. "You were a nurse, Doctor," Williams had stated, not as a query, but as a factual observation. For 15 years, Keisha had confessed, bracing for the inevitable judgment. Instead, Patricia extended her hand. "Neurologist for 30 years, and I still recognize competence when I encounter it." That casual exchange in the parking lot evolved into an improbable alliance. Dr. Williams, a 62-year-old African-American woman who had navigated her own challenges against prejudice within the medical field, understood instantly when Keisha elucidated Richard's symptoms. A brain tumor, an aneurysm, or something progressive like multiple sclerosis, Dr. Williams had surmised during their discussion at a corner cafe. Any of these could prove fatal if left unaddressed. "Have you been meticulously documenting everything?" Keisha presented her handwritten notebook, wherein she had meticulously recorded every observation. Patricia nodded with professional approval. "This gentleman should have undergone neurological examinations weeks ago. His arrogance will prove his undoing." Their strategy was straightforward: furnish sufficient evidence for Margaret Brooks to insist upon a comprehensive neurological evaluation. However, Richard was impeding their efforts with his unwavering refusal to acknowledge any perceived problem. "Dr. Harrison suggested I might be overexerting myself," Richard remarked to Margaret over dinner, oblivious to the fact that he had mistaken the dermatologist for his cardiologist. "But I do not place faith in younger physicians. They tend to diagnose ailments that do not exist." Margaret exchanged a concerned glance with her daughter, Jessica, who was visiting for the evening. Jessica, a final-year medical student, had also noted the alterations in her father. "Dad, when was the last time you had a complete physical examination?" Jessica inquired delicately. "Checkups are for infirm individuals," Richard retorted with escalating impatience. "I established a pharmaceutical empire. I believe I am cognizant of when something is amiss with my own physiology." It was during that same week that the most alarming incident transpired. Keisha was arranging the conference room when Richard entered, visibly disoriented. "Where is everyone?" he inquired, surveying the empty space. "The meeting was adjourned, Mr. Brooks. You adjourned it yourself yesterday," Keisha responded gently. Richard stared at her with a vacant expression, as if he did not recognize her, despite her having cleaned his office daily for 2 years. "Who are you?" he asked, a mixture of confusion and irritation evident in his tone. "I am Keisha from the cleaning staff." "Keisha?" He repeated her name several times, as if attempting to retrieve a lost memory. You mentioned something about physicians earlier." For a terrifying moment, Keisha perceived in Richard's dilated pupils the same bewildered gaze she had witnessed in neurological patients during her hospital years. The individual behind those eyes was progressively detaching from reality. "Mr. Brooks, are you feeling quite well?" she inquired, momentarily forgetting her subordinate position. The question seemed to jolt him back to lucidity. "I am fine," he growled, reverting to his customary antagonistic persona. "And you are not permitted to pose personal inquiries. Resume your duties." But Keisha had witnessed enough. That afternoon, she contacted Dr. Williams. "Time is of the essence," she stated. "Today, he did not recognize me for several minutes. This is not merely arrogance. It is active neurological deterioration." Then we must expedite our plan, Patricia responded. I will contact Margaret Brooks directly. As a physician, I can utilize professional concern as a pretext. That evening, while Richard slept soundly, another symptom Margaret had observed. She received a call from an unexpected source, Kesha Washington. Mrs. Brooks, this is Keisha from your husband's office cleaning crew. I am calling because I need you to be aware that I have documented all of his symptoms over the past few weeks. Margaret nearly dropped the phone. You are a nurse? I was, before individuals who treat me as if I am invisible forced me into cleaning offices. The bitterness in Keisha's voice was palpable, yet there was something else, absolute medical competence. Your husband exhibits classic signs of a brain tumor or aneurysm. The progressive symptoms, the cognitive decline, the unilateral tremors. It is all documented in my report. What report? The one I disseminated to all of his company directors 3 days ago. The very same one they disregarded because it originated from a mere custodian. Margaret felt the color drain from her face. You sent it to the directors. 47 pages of detailed medical observations with precise timestamps and symptom analysis. Even a prognosis of deterioration if left untreated. James Morrison dismissed it as employee paranoia, and Sandra Phillips suggested my termination for inappropriate conduct. The revelation struck Margaret with the force of a physical blow. As Richard was being loaded into the ambulance, she comprehended the full extent of the irony. The woman her husband had treated with the utmost contempt was the sole individual who had attempted to preserve his life. At the hospital, Dr. Chen's diagnosis corroborated every word Kesha had articulated. A slow, bleeding brain aneurysm responsible for the progressive neurological manifestations. Had it not been for the intervention today, he would have experienced a complete rupture within days. Death was virtually assured. When Richard regained consciousness following emergency surgery, his initial utterance was a rasping whisper. Where is the cleaning lady? Margaret held his hand, still weakened by the sedatives. Kesha, dear, she is in the hallway. She has been waiting for 6 hours. She attempted to warn me. She tried several times. And you treated her like refuse. Richard closed his eyes, tears coursing down his pallid cheeks. I must speak with her. As Keisha entered the room, Richard could barely meet her gaze. The woman he had publicly humiliated stood before him, still in her custodial uniform, yet exuding a dignity that rendered his prior arrogance pathetic and insignificant. You saved my life, he whispered. I have been attempting to preserve it for weeks. You chose to humiliate me instead. I am aware. His voice cracked. I understand I don't warrant your pardon, but you're correct. You do not. Keisha drew up a chair and took a seat, maintaining a respectful distance. But I did not rescue your life for your benefit. I preserved it because I pledged an oath to safeguard lives. And certain vows are of greater consequence than the treatment we receive from those we rescue. Richard's disgrace was only beginning. In the ensuing days, the complete narrative surfaced. The wealthy chief executive officer, who nearly perished due to his excessive pride, preventing him from heeding a custodial worker, a nurse, who had accurately diagnosed his ailments weeks prior. Sandra Phillips and James Morrison attempted to suppress the scandal, but Margaret had retained copies of all correspondence in which they dismissed and mocked Kesha's medical concerns. Recordings of meetings where they suggested her dismissal for unprofessional conduct went viral across social media. The media transformed the incident into a national emblem of discrimination within the corporate sphere. Black custodial staff member rescues CEO who disparaged her became the leading headline for weeks. The board of directors at Brooks Pharmaceutical convened an emergency session. The company experienced a decline of $300 million in market valuation over 3 days, and Richard was compelled to temporarily relinquish his position as CEO for medical recuperation and contemplation of human resources protocols. However, the ultimate humiliation occurred when Richard discovered that Kesha had declined all offers of severance compensation and paid interviews. I have no need for anyone's blood money, she informed reporters. I want this to serve as a precedent. Proficiency and self-respect are not contingent upon academic credentials or the hue of one's skin. While Richard underwent recovery from surgery, facing several weeks of physical rehabilitation to restore his motor coordination, Keisha quietly resumed her custodial duties. Yet, from that point onward, every employee at Brooks Pharmaceutical treated her with the esteem she had consistently merited. The individual who had spent his entire existence belittling those he perceived as inferior had learned, in the most mortifying manner imaginable, that his continued existence depended on the very individuals he regarded as insignificant. And the entire world bore witness to his lesson, in humility being broadcast on the national news. But did Richard genuinely absorb his lesson? And what would become of a woman who demonstrated herself to be superior to all the prejudice leveled against her? At times, the most profound retribution is not to dismantle someone. It is to compel them to endure a life acknowledging that they owe their very being to those they consistently deemed beneath them. 6 months later, Kesha Washington was presented with the National Heroine Award by the Surgeon General of the United States during a ceremony telecast live nationwide. The very custodial uniform that had been the subject of derision was now enshrined in the National Museum of African American History, accompanied by a plaque stating, "The uniform of a woman who proved that competence is devoid of color." Richard Brooks observed from the front row, seated in a wheelchair he still required on occasion due to the lingering effects of his surgery. His hands trembled subtly, no longer from his ailment, but from the emotional impact of witnessing the woman he had degraded being honored as she should have been from the outset. "Ladies and gentlemen," Kesha addressed the microphone, her voice resonating throughout the crowded auditorium. "For 15 years, I served as a nurse. For 5 years, I was treated as if I were invisible. But today, I recognize that I never ceased to be what I have always been. Someone who saves lives, irrespective of whether recognition is bestowed or withheld." Brooks Pharmaceutical was mandated to implement substantial reforms following the scandal. Sandra Phillips and James Morrison were discharged for discriminatory behavior, and the company established a diversity initiative that became a national benchmark. Ironically, the company's stock rebounded entirely once it demonstrated a genuine commitment to inclusivity. Dr. Patricia Williams, now the medical director of the newly established Kesha Washington Institute for Preventive Medicine, offered a smile from the audience. The institute, fully financed by a $10 million anonymous contribution from Richard Brooks, provided complimentary medical education to individuals from underprivileged communities. "When that gentleman instructed me to remain in my designated place," Kesha continued, "he failed to realize that my place has always been in saving lives. He simply could not perceive beyond his own ingrained biases." Richard had made several attempts to contact her during his recovery, but Kesha maintained her distance out of a sense of propriety, not out of animosity, but because she understood that certain lessons must be experienced in solitude to be truly internalized. The public disgrace Richard endured was devastating, yet it served as a catalyst for profound change. He lost friendships, social standing, and was compelled to confront decades of ingrained arrogance. However, he also gained something he had never possessed: genuine humility and respect for individuals he had always considered beneath him. "Revenge," Kesha concluded her address, "is not about making someone account for their actions towards us. True retribution lies in becoming so exceptional that their insignificance can no longer impact us." The applause persisted for 8 minutes. Richard was among the first to rise, clapping with tears streaming down his face. Later, in the corridor, he finally had a brief opportunity to converse with Kesha. "I was a fool," he stated simply. "You were," she concurred without hesitation. "But fools can learn if they possess sufficient humility. Thank you for saving me, even though I didn't deserve it." "I didn't save you because you were deserving," Kesha replied, adjusting the medal pinned to her attire. "I saved you because some principles transcend the treatment we endure, and because the most effective method to overcome prejudice is to demonstrate that our shared humanity surpasses the cruelty of others." Richard nodded, understanding that he would dedicate the remainder of his life to striving for the absolution he had already received. Currently, Kesha oversees 3 community hospitals and imparts advanced clinical observation skills to physicians. Richard has withdrawn from the business world to dedicate himself entirely to philanthropic endeavors, with a particular focus on medical education programs for minority groups. 2 lives were salvaged that day, one from a cerebral aneurysm, the other from terminal ignorance. The ultimate form of retribution against those who diminish our worth is not their destruction. It is to attain such extraordinary stature that they spend the rest of their existence attempting to comprehend how they could have been so perceptually impaired. Keisha demonstrated that competence, dignity, and greatness are not contingent upon the validation of others, but solely on an unwavering dedication to actualizing our true selves. If this narrative resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel for additional stories that illustrate how our genuine strength emerges precisely when others endeavor to diminish us.